There's some realities that we need to adjust. There are some things that we need to adapt in the image of masculinity. And to me, the most masculine thing I can do is to hold a safe space for somebody else. I feel like I am the most manly when I do that. When I feel like I can hold somebody through a difficult situation, through a challenge, when I feel like my wife is safe enough to start opening up to me about issues, when I feel like my friends are safe enough to start opening up to me about issues, that's when I feel the most masculine.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And in this episode, we're going to talk with my new friend, McKenzie. He has an entire men's group that can help other men do a better job with their relationships, to learn about how to be a better man, and not a weak man, but not an overbearing man, but just that right balance. He has some marvelous things to talk about masculinity and why it's so important for us to share with one another so we can get better ourselves. It's a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Hey folks, this is Chris, and I wanted to let you know that you can support this episode. If you love these conversations and get something out of them, you can support the show by helping me with the platform fees and technologies that make this show happen. Simply go to buymeacoffee.com/menfolkjourneys. Look, I know it's a long URL, but it works. buymeacoffee.com/menfolkjourneys, just like it sounds. You can donate $1, $5, $3, $10, whatever. You can even make it monthly. And all proceeds go to support the technologies I use to make this show happen. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode. All right, well, McKenzie Beebe, welcome in.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's wonderful having you here. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I am based in the mountains of Colorado with my wife, and I run one of the fastest growing and largest support resources for men online. So keeps me busy.
That's wonderful. So the obvious question is why you started it. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to touch on something that I saw on your website. There were so many different things about support group for men, but there was one thing that I thought was interesting and intriguing, and I hadn't seen it before. Okay. You called it the nice guy syndrome. And I was like, all right, that's pretty interesting. And as I went into it, there was this sense of balance that men are lacking, where there is definitely a need for us to pay attention to other people and to be thoughtful, but at the same time, there's also a real importance that we don't suppress the things that we actually need. And sometimes we have a really hard time doing that. It's kind of crystallized in that thought. Talk to me about the nice guy syndrome and what that is and why it's so dangerous.
So the first thing I'll say is it's not my term, right? It was created it was created by a man named Dr. Robert Glover, who wrote a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And the book is where the term comes from, nice guy syndrome. And the way I like to describe nice guy syndrome, it is essentially our deep-rooted shame or insecurity comes out in needing to seek approval from those around us. And so we work to try to control people's perceptions of us rather than actually standing firm on what we believe or what we need in life. So you were exactly right, Chris. We tend to put our needs to the side in an effort to try to seek approval from everyone around us. And that is, in essence, what nice guy syndrome is. How it comes out is in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that Dr. Robert Glover describes in his book is through covert contracts, which is this notion of I'm going to do some of these acts of generosity for my partner, for my neighbors, for my friends. And my hope is that they would do something in return. We make this invisible agreement that only I've signed on to. That is, because I've done this act of generosity, you now have to do something nice for me. The way I've seen it play out in a lot of men's lives, and including my own with past relationships, was I would actually store those acts of generosity almost into a bank. And when my partner would accuse me of doing something or of behaving in a certain way or having a certain belief, I would unload all those things from that bank of I've done all these nice things for you, right? I've taken out the trash, I've shoveled the snow, I've done all these things. And you're going to say that I'm doing this, or I'm not putting effort in, or I'm not listening to you, right? I'm doing all of these wonderful things. What more do you want from me? And so we actually weaponize our generosity and our niceness rather than actually using it as a vessel to give and to contribute into the world. We weaponize it.
So I was going to ask, clearly at some point you were a quote unquote Mr. Nice Guy because you suffered from that trap. And, it is an interesting trap. And part of it, I think, gets to the male ego that your website speaks to and that concept speaks to, where I think that biologically men have I wouldn't say a compulsion, but there's a genetic need for us to provide and care for family. We have to make sure that we feed and protect the closest tribe being our family. We have to provide. I was just talking to a guy today, a good friend of mine. He was laid off when he was about 40 plus and worked for a business for 20 years and they got laid off, right? And he's like, what happened? And then did some other stuff. And then finally he ended up working at Aflac. And, he walks in, he's 47 years old. His manager's 29, right? And he's like, I have to provide for my family. I've got to put food on the table and I've got a mortgage. How can I be successful at Aflac? And the guy was like, well, you can do this, 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 this. And Mark was like, okay, I just need 4 appointments a week. That's it. That's all I need? Then that should be okay. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to drive around the city to these various plazas. I'm going to knock on every freaking business door and I'm going to introduce myself and blah, blah, blah. And I'm securing these 4 appointments per week, period. And it's one of these things where his back was against the wall. He had to provide and he found a way. And then once you start doing that over time, you build these mental processes as a man to drive, yet that might blind you in terms of being a little bit more sensitive and aware and thoughtful about how other people are responding to you. So oftentimes men are caught in this situation where you want to be proud and you want to be assertive, but you don't want to be an a-hole, right? You want to make sure that you're strong, but you don't want to be dominating, right? It's a funny thing. And so we have this balance of the strength, but there's also this fragility that we have if we're not going to be good enough, right? And I mentioned in my podcast, it's how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood. And I chose that word mantle very carefully because it has 2 meanings. A, it's a cloak, you wrap it around yourself, and B, it's a responsibility that you pass on. I believe both of those things, right? That we try to understand that about manhood. Yet that responsibility piece is huge. And then what if you're like, well, maybe I'm not responsible. Maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm not passing on these right things. I have to believe that when you talk about men or talk with men about these concepts, that you're seeing this odd balance of ego and fragility happen in conflict or in tension all the time.
Yeah, I love how you put that. And the way I've described ego is essentially a self-image that's built and is operating out of an external force, right? So that external force being other people's approval, other people's image of you, or what that image should be, right? And so when you think of it in that way, the core of ego is not actually internalized. It's not actually inside of you. It's actually at the center of it is actually with the people who are around you, right? They dictate how real your ego needs to be or how not important your ego is in that given moment, right? Like they dictate your condition. They dictate your reality in that. And so I think, Ryan Holiday also says something like this, where he's like, ego tends to grow when individuals lack self-awareness and fail to maintain humility. And so in order to like really address your ego, you have to recognize the humility that comes with this, right? Or the humility that needs to be there in this, because that ego is going to fight against you at every chance it gets, because again, it's as real as the person who's in front of you who makes it real. It's not inside you. It is focused on how other people feel about you. And so as a result, you have to take each social interaction with the serious acknowledgement and humility, knowing, okay, I need to fight against this ego and I need to work to be more genuine and connected. A great example of this is...
keep going. Give me an example.
Yeah. So there's a great example of this that I've seen in my groups with men, where men will complain about not being able to hold close male friendships, not being able to have any close male friendships, that their partner is the only close person in their life. And one of the things we talk about is, what is the version of yourself you are presenting to others? Is it somebody who is immune to pain and problems? And that alone will get them to sit there and think and go, oh yeah, you know what? I am trying to present an image of that I'm immune to problems. When they ask, oh, how's you and your wife? What do you say? When they ask, oh, I heard you guys broke up. What's going on there? Just she's crazy. I'm moving on. I'm moving on to bigger and better things. You're not actually telling them anything, right?
That's hilarious. What a great answer. Oh, she's great. It's so interesting. I love that you said that you, especially a great work, and I want to talk more about your website and your program.
Yeah.
But this idea that a lot of men don't have close male friendships. What I will say is, one of the reasons that I started this podcast, McKenzie, is I've been blessed with male friendships. So we call ourselves our Urslings, right? If you ever read the Bernard Cornwell Last Kingdom series with Uhtred, Urslings is Viking for goat turd, which of course means it's your best friend, right? But me and my Urslings, we've been together 20 years. We run every Friday without fail. And in our text group, there's about 20 of us. Mix and match of people show up every Friday, but we go for a run and we have coffee and yik yak and bullshit. And what I can tell you unequivocally is that I'm a better man because of my friendship with my men. And I think that we've all become better fathers because of our friendships. And the way I pass that down is that I think our kids are more grounded and more successful because of our friendship. I think that it pays out in generations. And so the power of a group of male friends, I don't think can be understated in terms of the help that we need to get through our adulthood. And for you to talk with men where, like you just said, oh, she's crazy. I had a guy who they got divorced, and he said, "Oh, I don't understand. I thought we had the perfect relationship." And his friend said, "Clearly, it wasn't perfect for her." Right.
That's great.
Right.
One of the things we talk about is we need to diversify our relationships. It's a really difficult thing for men to grasp, which is we don't need to put everything on our partner. We don't need to put everything on our partner. Our partner did not sign on to this relationship wanting to bear all of your dog shit, right? She signed on to this relationship to create a beautiful complementary relationship with another person, right? She didn't want to have somebody rely on her and have her reactions and the things she say dictate that other person's condition. And when we over rely on one individual and we put all that pressure on what they're saying and how they're reacting and how they're taking any sort of thing that we're dealing with, we end up finding ourselves distancing ourselves from the person we really care about. And we end up getting overly anxious about losing that person as a result, right? Because if we lose them, we lose everything. And so we really work with men to diversify their relationships. She doesn't need to know immediately about any doubts you have in the relationship. Bring that to the guys first. Let's talk about it as a group. And then you can have better feedback for when you do have that conversation with your partner. You can actually come from a place of owning it rather than coming from a place of defending it. And that's something that we work a lot with. So I love hearing when guys have a group that they do something with, or they talk to about certain things with that create that ability to vocalize those problems, because that's what we're missing. And, you don't need one group to solve all of that. Right? Like, you can have your running buddies where you guys talk about certain things. And if they all have if they all have a relationship, you can start talking about relationships with them. You can have another group where you talk about your money problems, right? Like, you don't need to bear it all with one person. Diversify it. And so that's what we talk about a lot. And, it's really funny, Chris. One more thing I want to add before you respond is going back to the ego piece with you. You mentioned you mentioned something that I think really stood out to me, which is one of the things that I've realized about ego is it kind of creates victories when there is none. It kind of creates and paints you as a hero when you aren't one. And one of the things that talking about the guy who was like, yeah, the relationship was fine, and you were like, well, it was fine for. It wasn't fine for her. It was fine for you, maybe, but it wasn't fine for her. He's in this habitual pattern of painting himself as a hero, and he's in this habitual pattern of finding victories when there was none. And that, to me, is saying, oh, your ego is at play, right? If you can't come to the humility of maybe I've created or contributed to a problem, maybe I have been a part of an issue, then it's time to start reflecting inwards and bringing to the guys what needs to be worked on.
I love that. And I think maybe for men especially, we do have a hard time with vulnerability. And we have to look at ourselves as a hero and that we're right. Because if we don't, that means we're flawed. That means we're weak. That means that we're imperfect, and that's a real challenge for us, because suddenly I'm exposed, and then I'm not going to be desired. I'm not going to be seen as a man. I'm not going to be seen as strong. And so I create these defensive mechanisms just to make sure I posture all the time, right? And that is a trap we put ourselves into as well, without probably even thinking about it. It's an interesting thing, McKenzie. So for my upbringing, I was 5 years old when my folks split. And so when that happened, my dad left and I would see him every other weekend. But suddenly, instead of, you're 5, you're kind of around your parents. You're not really understanding the dynamic. You just think that they're around. But then when he wasn't around all the time, like in the day in, day out, I didn't necessarily notice his absence because he was around all the time, because he worked anyway. What I noticed, though, was that I felt differently about the fact that the family wasn't whole. And that, and then suddenly for my youth, just lived with my mom, and that had different impact, right? Because there's a lot of feminine energy, right? Not a lot of masculine energy in the house. And so I had to figure out, what was that masculine energy? What was my masculine energy? What did that look and feel like, right? Without seeing a daily model of manhood in my life, like I said, every day, I was like, well, what kind of man am I, right? What does it actually mean? And it took me, and I didn't understand how long it took me to figure that out, but it took me a long time to figure that out, right? Because I knew that I could see, and I'm a medium framed guy, right? I'm 5'11-ish, I'm 170. I'm not like this huge dude with a lot of facial hair and all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not that guy, and then, well, I'm not like, not to take anything away from, an overly scholarly, tepid person. I'm not that guy either. I've got a lot of energy. I've got a lot of virility, right? So where do I fit? I think a lot of men probably have a challenge with that. Like, what kind of man am I going to be? And what kind of man do I want to be?
You bring up something that's very sensitive for a lot of men. Something that is a big issue for a lot of men who I work with. So first off, backing up, you mentioned, being the perfect man. And I have found in my work, when we talk about being that person who's immune to pain and problems, we are trying to be that perfect man, the man who can deal with anything, not need help for anything. What we do is we disconnect from other people as a result of that. Why? Simply because people cannot connect with perfect people. You have flaws. I have flaws. That's what makes us interesting. That's what makes us someone worth talking to. I want to hear what pisses you off, what makes you happy, what makes you sad. That's what makes you a dynamic individual. What doesn't make you a dynamic individual is a know-it-all, someone who is immune to emotion. You will downplay excitement, and you will heighten frustration, and you will downplay someone's concerns, but your concerns are the most important. You are showing everyone that you do not want to connect deeper when you do that. So the very fact that you are imperfect and you are that you have problems and challenges is what makes you connectable, is what makes you open, and is what makes you someone that somebody wants to be around. That being said, the other issue that you brought up is this image of what masculinity needs to be. And there is some realities that we as men have to accept. 40% of women now make more than men, right? We had this great liberation into the workforce of women where it has done things to our economy that have never been able to be done before because we have now both genders contributing to the world. What a beautiful, magical thing. We shouldn't despise that. We shouldn't be angry at that as men. We should celebrate that because it is what has made the United States what it is today. There's some realities that we need to adjust. There are some things that we need to adapt in the image of masculinity. And to me, the most masculine thing I can do is to hold a safe space for somebody else. I feel like I am the most manly when I do that. When I feel like I can hold somebody through a difficult situation, through a challenge, when I feel like my wife is safe enough to start opening up to me about issues, when I feel like my friends are safe enough to start opening up to me about issues, that's when I feel the most masculine. And it plays into that inherent need for men to protect, to guide, and to lead, right? And so that's really where I put my focus with men is you don't need to be the breadwinner. You don't need to be the one who buys the house. You don't need to be the one who's doing all the work. You can simply be the one who holds safety and safe communication with the people around you. And that alone makes you a man who's contributing to the world today.
Beautiful, McKenzie. That is awesome, because what I love, and that it ties back to some of the earlier thoughts we had at the top of the chat, was that men biologically need to feed and protect the tribe. Now, 100,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, as little as 500 years ago, that meant doing some type of activity or action. Way back machine, it meant holding the spear, holding the bow and arrow, and actually bringing large animals back to the tribe that we could eat, because physically we were stronger than women, and physically we could go to a woolly mammoth, spear in hand, and do the work that's needed to feed and protect the tribe. As the world changed and we didn't necessarily have to go out to kill the food that we ate, and instead we purchased the food that we eat, then that shifted to money, right? So now we have to provide. How do we provide? Well, we don't go out and kill animals. Instead, we go out and buy animals. So I've got to earn money, right, to buy animals. And so that becomes this definition of feeding and protecting. And now it's changed again, right? As we evolve, the physical attributes that make men aren't as important for survival and feeding, protecting the tribe anymore, right? Some say, well, maybe it's your mind, right? It's how smart you are, clever you are, how adept you are at making money and playing whatever game is needed to make money. And then that actually has changed, because our partners can do that too, right? If physical brute force isn't the thing that's going to feed and protect the tribe, but it's cleverness and smarts, well, there are a lot of women who are very clever and very smart. You can figure out how to make money.
If you look at the data, we're going to lose that, right?
We're going to lose 100%. McKenzie, we are going to lose that. Women generally, biologically, I think, are cleverer and smarter because they've had to be biologically to navigate a variety of relationships to keep the tribe in order. They've got to know which son and which daughter from different families are going to be a good pairing to make sure that the tribe continues. They've got to know, don't eat that because that's poison, but do eat that if you're sick. And, make sure that you're protected here when you're 5 years old, and I've got to be a different parent than when you're 13 years old, right? The nuance and the understanding is just inherently, I think, stronger for women. And so even though they're a smaller percentage of the CEOs, most women-led businesses are actually more profitable than men-led businesses. And so you're right, we're going to lose that in a sense. And I think that it's so interesting for you to say, well, the new definition of feeding and protecting the tribe, the new definition of protection is emotional safety, is the safety of other people to be their most genuine selves so they can be the best version of themselves around you. And you as a man, maybe your greatest responsibility is to make other people feel comfortable with who they are.
Yep.
That's really interesting.
Yep. It's immune to the cultural evolution. It's immune to, and that's not to say that maybe you are the one who makes the money in the relationship and in the family. Maybe you are the one who goes out and chops the wood in the middle of the snow to feed the fire, right? Great, wonderful. That's not why people are around you. The number one thing women look for when they're dating is he kind? Is he good? Is he genuine? Is he honest? Right. And then the second thing, still in the reality of culture, is the financial piece, right? Is he financially viable? Can he actually contribute to the family? Or is he someone who's just playing video games in the basement, right? And so to me, that is what I work with for men is we're going to go from being emotionally aware, almost 2 decades behind women to now being the ones who can help drive the emotional awareness in our family. And gosh, if the hundreds and thousands of men that I've worked with in the past, if they were able to have a father who would ask curious questions, get to know what's going through your thoughts, challenge you on certain things in a healthy way, in a curious way, in a compassionate way, rather than challenging things in an aggressive or an abusive way, we would be able to grow some pretty incredible, beautiful boys into men for this next generation. And I feel like as of right now, you talk about the history, and I love how you characterize the history of the cultural role that men have played in our world. I really think that the pinnacle of it to the modern masculinity and the modern expectations around masculinity was the cultural shift behind World War I and World War II. The need to market and advertise the role of men in the world at that time created a long-term, now generational effect on how we see masculinity, right? Men after the war were able to protect their country, were able to protect their families, were able to go get great jobs, and were able to buy great houses. That has slowly changed over the years, but has not changed is the expectation of that. And that, I believe, is really what has created the modern issue today. Fathers still want their sons to be like their fathers, right? Their fathers still want their sons to be like their fathers, and so forth. And so we are dealing with a 120, 130-year-old problem. And it came out of, to me, the two great wars, when governments fully embraced the role of masculinity.
Yeah, governments did embrace the role of masculinity. And what I find very interesting about that idea, McKenzie, is what they talk about is never in the history of the world was a single generation so blessed as a white American male who was born right after World War II. The baby boomers. Right? In the whole history of the world, if you were in America, born 1945 to 1950, we were the only country at the time that came out of World War II in an economic momentum instead of an economic cavity. Other economies and countries were literally bombed. We were not. We were the bombers. And we were the protectors. We saved Europe. We ended the Japanese War. I mean, we did it. Like it or not, we did it. And so at the time, not only did we have the stature of the world and the preeminence in the world, but we also had the only economy, like I said, that had momentum. And so for those white men born in those 50s, in the late 40s or 50s, not only were they set up for success because education was inexpensive, housing was inexpensive, jobs were flourishing, they needed more jobs, and you were growing up in an era where there was plentiful jobs for your fathers. But those kids, like my dad was born in 43, 44, right in that time. He's right in this generation. So his father laid up a bunch of impressions on him about what kind of man he needed to be, the expectations of what he needed to do, right? And they were very clear with my dad. They were like, "Oh, you're the doctor, period." And he didn't really want to be the doctor. He was good in chemistry and biology. He was interested in that stuff. So he ended up actually pursuing the most academic of all MD roles, and that was to be a psychiatrist, right? Because he was interested in the mind. He was curious about the mind. So that's where he went. That's kind of his out. But as soon as he could, he escaped that family pressure and married my mom. And my mom did the same. She escaped her family pressures. They got married too young. But the imprint of his dad, I know, lasted his entire life. Even when he was his own father, even when he was his own person moving ahead into the world. And his dad, my grandfather, he was unpleasant. He was not a model of manhood that I wanted to be. And I knew that early on. And then you have this funny dichotomy, McKenzie, right? You're 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, or 13, 14, 15, and you're looking at these generations up and you're like, I don't want to be that. And why don't I want to be that? Well, I know why, because blah, blah, blah. But what does that make me, right? Am I less of a man because I don't want to be like a drunken a-hole who's a total a-hole to everybody? I don't want to be that. I'm not that guy. And so, it's interesting that you say that out of World War II, there was this posturing of who men were and what they should be. And those expectations are generational. And I think that they do carry over generations. And I think now we're starting, like you said, we're starting to try to come out of that. And if you're a young man in your 20s, you have such a mixed message of what manhood should be. I think it's very confusing.
And also, men have historically struggled when new opportunities arise. And what I mean by that is just go back before World War I. 14 years old, you're working on the farm. Most men in the United States before the Great Wars were farmers. They were in agriculture.
Right.
And we haven't been in this developing world for that long. It's been 3-4 generations maybe that we've gone from being primarily agricultural to now consumer-based. And that requires a lot more people in the workforce. That requires a lot more diversity in the workforce. It requires a lot more perspective than perception, because the role of men in this moment of great opportunity, where you're starting to realize that your grandfather, Chris, was the only one who was able to stand behind all of the successes that he tried to teach his son, your father. Your father may have not reached those benchmarks, met with some disappointment from your grandfather, and met with some societal or cultural disappointments. As a result, what did that do to you, right? He's still preaching what his father taught him, but he didn't actually reach those same benchmarks himself. And that's really hard for men to reckon with. It's hard for me to reckon with when I look at my lineage of men in my family. I know my grandparents reached the benchmark. My father and his uncles did not. And to still preach the same things and still expect or hope the same things in their sons that their fathers did is the natural progression of how these things continue, but it is also a damaging one. And so
it's a damaging one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And men feel that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say men and men do feel that. I think that men feel an immense amount of pressure to, in the past, it was an immense amount of pressure to provide for family, like we talked about. And then now it's an immense amount of pressure to be more sensitive, to be more aware, to like I said, to not throw up the, patterns of what, is called toxic masculinity or, entitlement. Right. And then yet at the same time to not be cowed and to not be emasculated, right, and to have a sense of pride and confidence. And so, when you talk about these generational shifts, I'm curious about with your group, the online group. Do you find that you cross over generations, and if so, how are these generations interacting with one another?
Yeah, you have to. I'll say this. When I started my journey and I was doing research, I found that there was an interesting quote that came from a study that came out of the 90s that said, yes, women are oppressed by their gender roles, but men have been constrained by theirs. And I think it summarizes the problem pretty beautifully in that, right? Which is we're constrained. And especially in a moment where there is still this inherent cultural expectation to look for men to give permission. Just go to a funeral, go to a memorial, right? No one really starts crying until a man starts to give that permission that it is okay to be that emotional. And I see that in our groups, right? Like us as coaches and facilitators, we are the ones who kind of establish the permission of what is okay and not okay. When you step into that leadership role, you have to be the one who grants permission. And one of the things that I think from the book Guyland, written by Michael Kimmel, he wrote something in there which was men crave permission. And so what we're looking for as men is permission to change. And we can't find that permission to change unless we find something to change into. And that's what we really work on in our groups, is We are giving you the options, the opportunities, the tools to make the change into something new. When I went on to my journey, I found there was tons of stuff on the problem we're having. You can go as far as Scott Galloway, Richard Reeves, right? There are some guys who are speaking about the problem in beautiful, articulate ways. It is really hard to talk about cultural solutions and to be able to articulate it in a productive way, right? And so us at Groups for Men, we really focused on how can we provide tools, direction, and a new devout purpose for men and give them those opportunities so that they can now in turn turn around and say, okay, I am going to replace my expectations with these new standards and expectations. And one of the things we mention in group all the time is you're not going to solve a problem until you find something you care about more to replace it with. And it's what we do. It's our primary focus in our groups is we're working not to fix these things, but to replace them.
We'll be right back. To replace them. And what I really love your use of language when you talk about tools, because men love tools. We love things that we can put our hands on that will work and solve a thing, right? Work to solve a thing, work to fix a thing, work to replace a thing. Because the read that I get, and from your website and just even this conversation, I mean, I've known you now for 50 minutes, and I think you're awesome. But B, I also think that instead of quote unquote therapy, it seems to me that you're having what I would call real coaching sessions, just like an athlete would, right? An athlete comes to a coach because they have these physical attributes and they want better tools to learn how to do whatever they're going to do better, right? For example, I was a swimmer. And my coach helped me with my technique. They helped me with my training. They helped me figure out how to be a stronger swimmer. Make sure that, hey, I was a backstroker, so when you go into the water, make sure you got your butterfly kick and don't do big kicks. Do tight kicks, small kicks. That's right. That's a tool. Oh, good. Thank you. That's a great tool. Right. Is that what your approach is? It's less quote unquote therapy and more tools and coaching?
You're exactly right. How our groups work essentially is you come into the group, it's no larger than 15 people, and you come in with we call it, we say, give us your dog shit. We want your dog shit. Give us everything you don't want to deal with and feel like you can't deal with. From there, we give you tools, and then you have a boatload of guys in that group who have tried that tool, who are working on that tool, who have modified that tool, right? So you can hear firsthand, right after you hear what the tool needs to be, you can hear firsthand from the other guys around you of how it was effective in their relationship. What did they do to tweak it, right? How did they adjust it? How did they adapt it to their situation? Giving you further ideas on how to do that. Because I'm only one man. I only have one perspective. So to be able to have other men there to say, hey, like I was given this tool 2 or 3 weeks ago. I tried it with my wife. It didn't work then, but then I realized I didn't do it at the right time. And so, I needed to do this or do that or whatever. And so that is how we really see our groups we're not just sitting there talking about our problems. We are sitting there talking about our problems with the intention to find the right tool to try out of that.
Right. It's an interesting thing because I think, I don't know, McKenzie, I like to believe that men in their hearts want to be better than they were before. I love, I'm sure you've read Jordan Peterson, the Rules to Live By. And one of my favorite ones where he says, don't compare yourself to other people, compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And it was so elegantly and simply phrased. And I was like, I of course, right? Why I wish I had read that sentence 30, 40 years ago.
Yep.
It would have saved me so much mental anguish in terms of how I see myself. And it gets back to what I think you talked about earlier with ego, where we have this perception of ourselves based on the role we want to play to other people. Like, I'm this guy, and that's what everybody sees me as. And it's, again, that is another trap we put ourselves in, because suddenly we can't live our own authentic lives. We have to live the role that we're showing to other people.
Yeah. And it's a limited belief. You know, we talk a lot about beliefs with guys who first come into groups, and we define what beliefs are, which is something we have drawn a conclusion in which we had circumstantial evidence or very situational evidence to confirm is true, right? So I am drawing a conclusion that I am bad at communication because when I was younger, I had a stutter, right? Is that true, or did I make it true? And for a lot of men, they take some circumstantial evidence, draw conclusions, and then find themselves in a corner where they have no decision. They have no way out because they've already said, I tried this, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work. What else am I supposed to do? Well, that is your problem, is you have a limited belief. And so I fully believe, Chris, every man out there, even ones who have done terrible things, I believe they want to be better. And I believe that the reason they've done terrible things is they felt like they had nothing else to try. They had nothing else to do. And so when I went on this journey, my big thing was I want them to have the opposite problem. I want them to not feel like they don't have any tools. I want them to feel like they have so many tools and it's confusing which one to try first, right?
An abundance of tools and the options available, right? And, you know, it's so funny you say that, because I think... funny is the wrong word. I just think it's insightful the way you phrase that, because men need options, right? I think that what men in particular want to have options available to them so they're not forced into decisions or situations that they don't want.
Yes.
And the options that they create for themselves, and it might be, I'm sure it's true with women. I just know that I'm a man, so it's the only thing that I can speak to as a man, right? Yeah. But the idea is that the more options you have, the more empowered I am to make a choice or decision or action that is in the best, that might serve me in the best possible way, or at least I hope will serve me in the best possible way, because you never really know. You think it's going to be a good outcome, but you don't really know until it happens. But just the options to have that available is what I think gives men also a sense of assurance and a sense of calmness and security. You can make better decisions when you have more options. You know, I think of, so I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And at that time, the steel industry collapsed. And for Pittsburgh, that was torpedo. And especially, so my dad, mentioned, was a psychiatrist. So he ran the drug and alcohol units in Butler Memorial Hospital. Now, Butler is a small town north of Pittsburgh. Butler's a steel town. You know, Army Corps was there. And that was a devastating time for that small town, because they were steel factories, and Bethlehem Steel, you know, the steel works up there, and literally jobs just vaporized. And those men, McKenzie, didn't have options, right? They were completely constrained, or at least they thought they were, because I worked in the steel mill for 15 years. And at that time in the 70s, when you were 42 or 45, you looked a little bit older. It's a different time now, right? In your 40s, 40 is the new 20, right? But at that time, if you're 45 years old and you've only worked in the steel mill, you have a high school education, you didn't have a lot of options. What could you do? Very frightening, like existentially frightening. And so for you now with the groups, I would think that presenting men with so many options and tools must be a relief, because then they can pick and choose and figure out what's best for them.
And it moves them out of survival. When you're out of options, you go into survival. And so when it comes to conflict, with their partner, men freak out because they have no options. They feel like they have no tools at their disposal. So what do? They lean on the tools that they had when they were 5, when they were 4.
They can yell.
Pout, yell, get angry, throw things, lie, cheat, deceive. Those worked when I was 4. They'll work today. And they have no new tools. And so the moment they have more new tools, the first thing we see, the biggest change in men within the first 2 weeks of joining group, they're regulated. They're calmer. They're able to have more difficult conversations with their partner because they've realized, oh, I can take this somewhere. I'm not fearful of the outcome. I'm not fearful of the content. I can actually hold my own in this conversation because I know what to expect. I know where to go, and I know how I want to take it. And just by adjusting tools and giving them options, right? When you have a lot of money, you have a lot of options. You don't feel like you're in survival mode ever, right? When you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of options. You feel like you're in survival mode. And that's essentially the quickest improvement we see in men. And it's why I think we are so effective. Within a month, we're able to see huge change in men who come to groups. And it's solely because they start getting tools and they realize that's what I was missing. I was just missing the options.
I love it. It's interesting. I think group is great because I think group helps instead of one-on-one therapy. Very different roles, right? One-on-one therapy, I'm not dogging it. I think it's great, super important for people who seek that out and find progress with that. But group is different, right? Group gives you a sense of community. Group gives you a place to go with other men so you don't feel stigmatized. I think that one of the reasons AA and Al-Anon were so successful is that it's a group, right? It's people.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you're doing, McKenzie, because you're creating this tribe you are creating the safe space, a masculine safe space for other men to learn how to communicate effectively, because it is true. Generally, I think women are better communicators. And one thing that I've been told by other women is that, oh, Chris, you're not a Neanderthal, right? You're not a knucklehead. You seem to talk pretty well with women. Well, I was raised by a single mom, right? So predominantly, and she was a talker. And, I could talk a lot. I could be pretty loud. My mom could talk a whole lot. She could be really loud. So it was part of the growing up experience. But then also, McKenzie, when we had kids, we had 2 daughters, right? So for most of my adult life, until we got Mr. Peanut, the male cat, I was the only male in my house forever. Right. So surrounded by feminine energy and surrounded by young women who are really smart and super articulate. My wife is brilliant and our daughters are brilliant and they can speak brilliantly. I find myself oftentimes at the dinner table trying to catch up or trying to talk through it. And so I think that they have taught me how to be better communicators. But I can imagine a young man whose father is there, and maybe it's a dominating father, there are only boys in the house. McKenzie, where is he going to learn how to talk about his thoughts, feelings, fears, and insecurities?
Yep, you're exactly right. And when we talk about therapy, I'm a little more combative than you probably when it comes to therapy. I mean, in my view, nothing screams I have a unique problem than sitting down with somebody who has, a license and accreditation to be able to navigate that problem, right? Whereas in a group, the first thing you realize is it's not a unique problem. It's something that everyone else is experiencing or have experienced at one point in their life, right? And so I have young guys who come to group who are in the same group as 60-year-olds. And by the end of the group, they're like, oh my God, he's gone through the same thing. And because I'm coming to group, I can address it 50 years before they did, right? 40 years before they did. And there's something so enabling and powerful in that. We have 80-year-olds who have come to group and 60-year-olds are like, oh, I'm glad I'm doing this now so that I'm not doing it then, right?
Right.
And so to me, when it comes to actually solving this communication hurdle that men have, first off, 85% of therapists are women. We don't have the representation that women do in therapy. And second, nothing screams to a man, you are the problem and you are unique, than saying, oh, you need to have an individual therapy session to work through your problems, when really their problems has been all other men's problems for hundreds of years. We just haven't addressed it collectively as a group.
And I think that you address it stronger in a collective group, because you have other men who are cheering you on. Because, yes, we seek validation. Yes, we seek camaraderie. I think that, it's interesting. Men, gravitate towards teams. We do. That's my other male cat. So we actually, just strange but true, we got another cat. And this is another male cat. Now my wife, sometimes she's the one that is the minority, because I got 2 male cats and me and my wife. And she's like, wait a minute, how did this happen? But what it was actually really funny, McKenzie. And I think you'll probably appreciate this with, so for years we only had girl cats and girls in the house. And I worked with a lot of women and stuff like that. And my daughter brought our cat home, and she said, oh, her name is Peanut. And we were like, okay, well, you found her, you saved her from, being, from imminent, disaster. And exactly what you should have done, bring her home. We're on vacation, but you brought her home. So you got to go get her spayed and we'll split the bill, blah, blah, blah. And I came back from vacation and I looked at the vet bill and it said procedure : neuter. And I was like, oh, well, Peanut we'll just rename to Mr. Peanut, right? But here's the thing, McKenzie. My relationship with him completely changed because I knew he was a male cat. Mm-hmm. I did. Yep. It's so kooky, but it did. I was like, you're my boy. You're my fella. Like, you're a thing. And I think, that men really need / crave / get a lot of benefit from being with other men and having male friends and having a group of male friends, whether it's within a team sport, whether it's a collective. I think we really thrive on those kind of numbers.
Yeah. I've had several couples in which the wife or the girlfriend will ask, like, why is it that he's able to communicate so effectively in these groups, and then he comes back to me and we can't have that same dynamic? And I tell her, I'm like, he has the communication skills and awareness of a 15-year-old, right? You have the communication and awareness of a 42-year-old adult, right? You've been grown up in a culture that embraces you communicating and encourages you to communicate better and more effectively. Men are not. We are in the field of doing and performance. That's what we are evaluated on culturally. And so we are able to go into a group and have that same commonality with one another. And that's why we're able to connect deeper with one another than if this was a mixed group where it's both men and women. And we've done those and we have those, right? We actually have free monthly ones that you can bring your partner and all these other things. And we teach certain coaching things because I think it's helpful for women to see the work that the men are doing.
Sure.
But when it comes to that deep work, it's got to be men only. There is something about that commonality of that restriction or that lifelong battle with communication that we've had that allows us to be able to open up and say, he's been there. He knows what I'm going through. He knows what I'm talking about. All good. I'm going to open up to this man.
Right. And I think in some ways it's easier for men to be vulnerable with other men because they don't feel like they're exposed or that they can't be this hero to another woman, right? To be vulnerable to another woman, to show weakness to another woman, that's really challenging for men. Yeah. I think still inherently, I think we have a really hard time with that.
Because we are battling with a pro. We're battling with a pro. Right? If you go into a fishing competition and it's your first time with fishing, you're looking at their boat going, I've got no chance. So what am I going to do? fight, flight,
What am I going to do?
run.
I'm going to shut. Right. I'm going to write exactly. And I'm going to shut down, and I'm going to be, uncommunicative, unresponsive. And I'm going to, project this strength because I really don't quite know how to have a deeper, more meaningful conversation. Again, because I was never shown that, right? I never saw my dad, my uncle, these men. I've never seen them actually deeply communicate. The one thing that, strange but true when I think about it now, McKenzie, that helped me naturally move into a space where I feel comfortable expressing vulnerability is that my dad was a psychiatrist, and so we had to talk about people's feelings, right? Strange but true. He didn't talk about his feelings. Ha ha. He didn't talk about his vulnerabilities, but he could talk about other people's vulnerabilities. So I knew they existed somewhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how many men who know, they're like, I know I need to be talking about my feelings more, but I don't. I'm bad at them. I'm bad at talking about my feelings. And the simplest thing we say to them is, first off, you need to understand the value of feelings. They are not there to hurt you, right? Just like everything else, they're there to enhance your experience, to give you color to your experience, right? Same way your eyes give you vision, your ears give you hearing, your feelings give you something. What is that something? To me, it's the meaning of your experiences, right? Your emotions and your feelings tell you the meaning of an experience, whether something is very important or whether something's not important at all. And so that is the value of having those feelings, is you can sit there and go, oh, is what she's telling me really important, or is what she's telling me not important at all? And it's those, when you see how it works for you, you can start navigating it and communicating in that way. Okay, how did this feeling work for me? What was my intuition's nature or my feelings' intention with giving me this feeling? Because it's inherent. It's going to happen whether you want it or not. It's not something you bring intentionally. You can definitely manufacture it yourself, but you can't just train your body to say, this won't make me sad anymore. As hard as you can try, it's not. It's a blister, right? You ignore it, it's just going to get louder and louder and louder, or it's going to find other ways to make you stop walking with that blister. That's the terrible, awful thing about feelings. But when you see how it works for you, it changes your whole perspective. And you can start saying, okay, like, I felt betrayed in this moment because of this, that, or the other. And that's what my body's trying to tell me. So should I accept that and move towards that feeling? Or should I say, you know what, thank you for letting me feel that, but now I'm going to introduce logic into this situation. Sometimes you got to ride with those feelings all the way to the end. Sometimes you got to introduce logic into it, right? It just depends on utility.
Yeah. And you know what, though? You just talked about a tool. You just talked about a mental framework that a man can go through to get through situations where, instead of feeling lost, like they don't have any tools to navigate these, feelings and these complex relationships, to kind of unpack and say, oh, actually, I am empowered. There are certain things that I can do and think about, even if I've never seen anybody do that. I know that they're out there, and that I can do that too. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. So the website is called groupsformen.com.
Yes. groupsformen.com. We have 2 self-assessments on there that you can take. We want to give you instant value. So we have a relationship self-assessment on there, and then you can also find a nice guy self-assessment on there. Basically, we just answer these honest questions to determine, how badly do you need some tools? How badly do you need some of these the things that we talked about today, and much more. And so from that evaluation, we then reach out to you and want to talk to you one-on-one to determine, what's best for you. Is it groups? Is it individual coaching? Is it a more accelerated program? What should we give you that allows you to start your journey effectively? And so we really try to keep it focused on what is best for that man and what he needs in that moment. So you can go to groupsformen.com, take those self-assessments, and start your journey there.
I love it. Fantastic. Got one final question for you, McKenzie. I could talk all night about this stuff with you, and maybe we'll have a round two, because I'd love to learn a little bit more. So who is someone that you know that I don't know, but I should know?
Have you ever heard of David R. Hawkins?
I have not. I'm going to write that down.
Okay.
David R. Hawkins.
David R. Hawkins. He is a brilliant man, and our tools are the backbone of our tools are the books he's written. There's one called Letting Go, which is unbelievable and amazing. And if you want to know the essence of the mechanism behind all the tools that we show in Groups for Men, Force versus Power is the book that gave us the groundwork for all of our tools. So,
Force versus Power. I love it.
Yep.
I love it. I will pick that up. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I really appreciate your time. I love the message, and congratulations on the work that you're doing. And honestly, I'm very admiring of your courage to take that step in your career, to do something like that and turn it into a profession and a livelihood. I think it's very purposeful. I think it's an alignment of what you love doing, what you're good at, and where there's a need. It's also, why I did this podcast, but you're creating a whole business out of it. And I think that's marvelous. Really well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. I received that. We've been a part, our whole team has been a part of other men's groups in the past and been a part of other support groups. And we really felt like we need an industry. Everything shouldn't be volunteer. We need to be able to pay coaches. We need to be able to hire more coaches. We need to be able to grow an industry so that we can have this be more mainstream. And so it is very hard work. It is not always pleasant and fun. But I appreciate things like this where you're doing your part and having these important conversations, because when we all kind of combined our efforts together, we can make this a well-known problem and also create well-known solutions. And so thank you for everything you do.
100%. That's the whole idea. So we can all get better together, right? That's the idea. All right. Well, McKenzie, you are awesome. I hope we get to keep in touch. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Well, okay, McKenzie Beebe, let's go. Oh my gosh. Man, I love what this dude's doing. I love what this guy's doing. Bringing men together so that they can have a confident, confidential place to share some of the things that they're dealing with, and ways in which they can learn how to be a better communicator, and ways in which they might have been a quote-unquote Mr. Nice Guy by, appeasing, but not really being true to themselves. And I like that idea, because it doesn't mean that you have to be an a-hole. It just means that you actually have to respect yourself and love yourself, and not please just to please because you think that's the heroic thing to do, but you understand what the heroic thing to do is. I love it that he said his definition of masculinity, or it feels most manly when he can provide a safe space for people around him. That's so great. And that's so true, right? Aren't we supposed to feed and protect the tribe? Isn't that our job? So what did I learn from McKenzie? I can feed and protect the tribe by creating safe spaces for others. That's real protection. That's real safety. And that means emotional safety too, right? An emotional space, not just a physical space. So understanding my own emotions so that I can create safer spaces for others and communicate in that way, that might be the most masculine thing of all. I love it. And I hope you loved it too. And I hope you love this conversation. I hope you love this podcast. I hope you tell other folks about it. Tell other men. Get them to listen in. We need some more subscribers and listeners. And if you want to join, that'd be awesome. Visit menfolkjourneys.com and book a conversation. I'd love to hear your story, and I'd love to hear what you think about definitions of masculinity and how it affects your life too. Thank you so much for listening. Word bid Falarid.